Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he's received a commitment from US President Donald Trump that will see Turkey able to buy the American-made F-35 fighter jet. It's the most prized and feared piece of airborne equipment on the planet, and not everyone is pleased that Turkey will have use of it. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the sale of the stealth warplanes would destroy the balance of power in the Middle East. Erdogan, meanwhile, is over the moon at being welcomed back from under the weight of sanctions imposed by the US when Turkey bought Russian military equipment.
We have received a commitment for 5 aircraft. Mr. Trump has also made a separate promise to us on this matter. In meetings at this leaders' summit, we are testing, in a positive way and with a view to the future, the promise we received from them regarding the F-35s. On this matter as well, Mr. Trump always stands by his word.
Right, we've heard from the Turkish president. Let's hear from Stein, the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and most recently having served as the chief content officer at the War on Rocks for Metamorphic Media. Got his PhD, by the way, in Middle East and Mediterranean Studies from King's College London. If we went through all of your qualifications, Aaron would be here all night. So let me just say hello and a warm welcome to you. The Israeli PM was surprised, or at least hugely disappointed by this move. What changed? How has Erdogan got himself and got Turkey out from under these sanctions?
Well, I'm not sure he's quite gotten himself out of these sanctions yet. And the reason why I say that is that these sanctions, at least on paper, have a lot of requirements that have to be met in order for them to be lifted. And it's unclear if Turkey, well, it's very clear that Turkey hasn't met those requirements. Now, I think what the Trump administration wants to do is to waive those requirements to have them lifted. But that's easier said than done. There will be multiple voices in the U.S. legislature that will probably push back against this, not the least of which, because they wrote the legislation in the first place to impose these sanctions on Turkey.
Just before we go on, let's take a look at the prize on offer and get the basics of the F-35 and why it's so revered, Aaron. The F-35 Lightning is special, apparently, because it functions as a flying supercomputer rather than just a traditional fighter jet. It's a combination of sensor fusion, I'm told, which merges data from all onboard systems into a seamless 360-degree picture of advanced, low-observable stealth design and unparalleled electronic warfare capabilities, which apparently allow it to dominate the modern battlefield. We had great reporting from our journalist in Istanbul a few months ago talking about the rise of the Turkish arms industry. To someone like myself who's not so familiar with the industry, Aaron, it was surprising. I wonder, does the size of the Turkish arms industry help them procure something like the F-35, even though you've made those asterisks on this deal? Does that help them get close to a deal like this?
So Turkey was one of the original members of the consortium to build the F-35. And what that means is that they actually paid money towards its development. And what happened is that when they ultimately went through and bought a Russian-made missile system called the S-400, there were concurrent things that happened over here in the United States that led to Turkey's removal from the F-35 consortium. And what that means is that the stuff that Turkey was making, that this defense industry was making for the F-35, they came off contract and they were moved to other suppliers. And so what we're talking about now is that maybe if sanctions are lifted and if certain criteria are met, Turkey could buy the F-35. And that's different than what they had before, which is that they could help build the F-35.
Fascinating. So at the beginning of our chat, I mentioned that Prime Minister Netanyahu was extremely troubled by Turkey being promised delivery, as you make that stipulation, not being part of the building process, but delivery. Why is that so troubling for Israel?
Well, Turkey has seen, sorry, let me start again. Israel has seen Turkish foreign policy change and doesn't like it. And so they view any ability of Turkey to advance its armed forces, to be the second operator of the F-35 in the Middle East. Israel is the first, of course. They see as problematic from their foreign policy goals. And so Netanyahu has been pushing for a long time against the export of the jet to Turkey. Now, this is a change. When Turkey joined the consortium very early in its process, we're talking about the early 2000s, Israel was fine with it. But over the last couple of years, perhaps decade, Israel has shifted its position and now lobbies aggressively against any sale of the jet to Turkey.
So that's Israel's view of Turkey. According to Turkey, who are their threats in the region?
That's a great question. It changes every single day. One of the major problems that Turkey fears is that its neighbor, and I'm not actually talking about Russia, I'm actually talking about Greece, is a purchaser of the F-35. Now, they don't operate it yet, but they will. And so there's concerns in Turkey that they will lose air superiority in the Aegean. That's one. And two is obviously Russia. Turkey is a member of the NATO alliance, one of the 32. And the F-35 is the backbone of NATO's air power, and it will be for the next 30 years. And so I certainly think that there's Turkish interests in joining the club of F-35 users. There was back in the early 2000s, and then we've had this significant and now decades-long detour with this S-400 purchase.
Donald Trump's language towards Islamic countries is so often harsh, right back to when he was campaigning against Clinton, or outright offensive, according to some. Why are the United States and Turkey friendly, and why are Trump and Erdogan friendly?
There's any number of speculation about that across the Atlantic, whether it's in Turkey or in Washington. What I would say about this is that Donald Trump at his core treats a lot of these things like he's back in business, which is that the U.S. has a product to sell. Turkey wants to buy that product. And so why should there be any limitations on the ability of the U.S. to sell something to Turkey, especially when we're talking about billions of dollars worth of equipment? Now, as this interview reveals, it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's an easy story to sell, is that we have a buyer, we have a willing seller, and politics are getting in the way.
That pragmatism aside, taken into account, but aside, and aside from the capability in the military sense, what does the lifting of this ban, or potential lifting of this ban, do for Erdogan on the global political stage? Does it open more doors? Does it help him impress other NATO leaders?
It's still too early to tell. As I said, there's a lot of stuff that would have to happen, from saying something in a meeting with Erdogan in his own palace to the actual export of the jets. But if that were to happen, we're talking about years down the line. Donald Trump will not be in office by the time the first F-35, in theory, that Turkey purchases would roll off the assembly line. But what it would do is it would modernize Turkish air power. Turkish air power is aging, and they need replacements for its current fleet of fighters. And so they had previously identified the F-35 as what should have been the backbone to their air force. Now, that all got screwed up because of decisions Ankara made. And so perhaps they're trying to undo those as they think about the future of their capabilities in the air.
Yeah, so this is one small step, if you like, towards that big goal. With a really broad view, though, to what extent has Erdogan recovered his position as an accepted, if not loved, political figure on the global stage, do you think?
I think pretty well. I mean, Trump has never liked this F-35 ban on Turkey. The ban began in his first administration, and we had the 4-year interlude with Joe Biden, and then now we're back with Trump too, and all that entails. But as sort of the world grapples with Donald Trump himself and his changing positions, or at least ostensible changing positions, on the U.S. commitment to transatlantic security, European leaders look around the world and they see a large country in NATO that still sits on borders with Russia as a potential partner, or to continue with the allies to augment European defense. And sometimes you got to dance with the devil you got, and that's Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Aaron Stein, it's been an absolute pleasure to pick your brain as we digest the news that Turkey could be able to take delivery of the F-35s. A few boxes to tick yet, but we really appreciate your input. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So thanks to Aaron. I hope you enjoyed his take on the changing landscape that is the US-Turkey relations. Big thanks to our production team here in Berlin. We'd all love to know what you think of this step taken by Trump toward giving the F-35s to Turkey. Or do you understand why Israel has a problem with it? Let us know.